studio, a great guy who's also a big fan of the channel, Rob Zombie. So shut the cell phones off and kill the computer, because headed your way is 30 minutes of unadulterated zombie. And as you'll see, Rob's a man who really pulls no punches. He shoots straight from the hip on everything, from deciding to go solo to giving VH1 Classic the scoop on his new release, Educated Horses. After a 5-year layoff, Rob has come back with a vengeance. The album features the acoustic, that's right, acoustic, Death of It All, and the lead single, Foxy Foxy. It's time to dive right into the always thunderous and always very cool world of Rob Zombie. Rob, great to see you, man.
Nice to see you.
You are out there on the road, and there is a new Rob Zombie album called Educated Horses, which in and of itself is actually news, because it wasn't too long ago that a lot of people were under the assumption that you were going to be moving away from music and then, you know, fully immersed into film with the 2 great movies that you made. I guess this all started, take us through the process, because I guess it all started with Ozfest when you headlined the second stage, right?
It did start with Ozfest. I mean, I love playing music, and I love touring, I love doing all that. Obviously, I've been doing it for so long, but, you know, the band that I had at that time started degenerating in relationships, and no one was talking. And it was the second time in my life where I was on tour with a band that wouldn't speak to each other. Right. You know, and as much fun as that seems like it would be, it really makes you crazy after a while, because you're on stage and it seems like it's so great, and then you get off stage and everyone just walks their separate ways and ignores each other. So after that tour ended, I was like, enough. I'm so tired of this. I'm so exhausted, you know. This is so fun. It's the greatest job in the world, and somehow it's seeming miserable. And then at that point is when I went off to make Devil's Rejects, and that was such a blast that I thought, like, well, I guess this is where I am at, you know. I'm going to stay here. And then I got a call from Sharon Osbourne about doing Ozfest. And I said, well, I don't have a new record. And she was like, I don't care. But I said, I won't do main stage, because I find I don't like playing main stage because it's so sterile. But second stage always seemed like a blast because it's chaos. Right. So I put together a new band, sort of thinking that I would cancel and not actually play, that we'd get in a studio and I'd go like, oh, this is just what I remember. And we had a blast, and Ozfest was a blast, and got all psyched and came home and made a record really fast in like 2 months.
The new album, first of all, the title, Educated Horses, is a little bit of a departure for you, always kind of like the Sinister Urge and kind of darker titles. What's the story behind the title of the album?
It was just something, the whole record really, even though it seems like it's like spooky stuff sort of, is all stuff I remember as a kid, and that was something I remembered as a kid, this circus attraction called Educated Horses. And it just sounded, it was a lyric in the song, and it just sounded, it kind of kept sticking with me. And I knew it was going to be one of those titles that seemed weird, and people would keep asking me, waiting for a crazy story. But it just seemed like Swordfish Trombones or some album like that, you know?
Right.
So.
And it's interesting that this album, I would say, of the records you've made, whether it's White Zombie, Rob Zombie, there's a lot of dynamics to this record. You've got the really heavy-duty stuff, and then you've got kind of maybe some spacey stuff in there, and then, of course, you've got a ballad, an acoustic-based song on there. So was that something you strive for? Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I really wanted to do this time out, because I'm always was going back to the records that I loved as a kid. One thing I noticed, they're short. Kiss Destroyer is like 34 minutes. So every song seems like a hit. It doesn't matter, you know, it's like a throwaway
Dressed
track.
to Kill's 29 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, and I would listen to those records over and over and over, to death, you know. I would literally wear them out. And then you get new CDs, and you're like, well, I never really got to track 27. Right. Like, you get kind of like to track 8 and start over again. So, and that's still the love of the album, which I still love. And with, having some heavier songs and lighter songs, there's like a pacing and a flow that it works as, like, I think, as a chunk of music as opposed to just a random download, which is, I think is that's the biggest downside to that, the death of the album.
Well, there's so much of a 70s influence in a lot of the things you do. Was there a defining moment for you? Was there an album, a movie, something you saw that really put you over the top and said, that's what I'm going to do with my life?
It was a couple things. I mean, I think it was 2 things. It was like Kiss and Alice Cooper. I remember buying the Alice Cooper show, I think, the live record first, and it had him, in the arms of the Cyclops and holding the giant toothbrush, and I was like, oh my God. And as a kid, you can't even figure, you're in 3rd grade or something, and you can't even figure out, you're like, is this even music? I don't even understand what this is. Because up until that time, my favorite band, I think, was probably like the Banana Splits.
Right.
Or, I didn't realize the Partridge Family and the Monkees were fake. That was what I was into.
I think we were like brothers at some point and didn't know it, man, because I was the same way.
I still love Mike Nesmith. I think he's a genius. I was watching Elephant Parts the other day.
Oh, God. So, also a couple special guests on Educated Horses we should mention, too. I know you've got Tommy Lee on there, and you also got Josh Freese on some of it, too, right?
Yeah, that's sort of, I actually started making the record twice. I made it at one point before I was shot Devil's Rejects, and it just wasn't working. I didn't have the right group of guys, and I didn't have a drummer, I didn't have anything solid, but, Tommy Lee's good friends with the producer, Scott Humphrey, so he's always in and out of the studio, so he'll always play, because he loves playing. And Josh Freese is a friend, so he'd come in and play. But none of it ever solidified into songs until I went back, and what I did is I stripped all the music out and just kept their drum tracks and wrote new songs to their drum tracks.
Oh, okay.
So, because their performances were so great, it was a shame. I couldn't erase them.
Right, right. Talk about the track Foxy Foxy, which was the first single and also a music video that you directed.
Right.
You've directed a lot of videos,
Yeah.
both for yourself and for other artists as well. But that track has an interesting flavor. Speaking of, that song really captures almost a 70s kind of like funk, like almost dance vibe to it.
Yeah, we were like, over the summer on tour, it's like the whole band, we were like T-Rex bananas, because we had gotten that Born to Boogie DVD, and we must have watched it about 100,000 times. We'd watch it every day before going on stage, and we was crazy with it. And we just wanted to, we just loved that vibe, and that song was, we were just trying to come up with something like that. And some of the other songs we were just obsessed with, Slade or Gary Glitter, and we were just trying to always, in a subtle way, work that vibe in through the record.
Coming up, forget what you've heard. It's the real reason Rob had tried a bare bones approach to performing live.
What kind of was surprising was nobody complained. Like after all those years of all that dancing robots on stage and whatnot, we walk on stage with nothing and nobody even says anything.
Welcome back to VH1 Classics Hanging with Rob Zombie. Now, if you thought my first moment with Rob was some real rock and roll TV, well, it was just a taste of what you'll enjoy this segment as Rob and I continue to talk about what the metal great is up to, including his latest release, Educated Horses. In stores now, Rob's outdone himself on his new record. The release features the acoustic Death of It All and the album's lead single, Foxy Foxy. Without delay, here's more of my Hanging with Rob Zombie. So, Rob, I want to ask you about your stage show, because earlier we were talking about Alice Cooper and Kiss and the theatrical aspects of what you do, which obviously you've taken some of that stuff as an influence in your stage show and everything you've done. But there was a point where the White Zombie, the Rob Zombie live experience got to be really big. Like, you did the big shows, and then for Ozzfest you stripped it back a little bit. Where are you now in your thinking?
We're sort of in the middle. I mean, yeah, the last tour I did before Ozzfest was just absurd. I mean, when I look back now, I mean, it was fun and it was great, but there comes a point where it's no longer a rock band. It's like, I really felt like, hey, it's Siegfried and Roy, why don't we just make a tiger disappear? Because it was just becoming so big that it didn't, we could walk off stage and probably no one would notice for 15 minutes. So for Ozzfest, we said, let's do nothing. Like, no one could believe, oh, we're not bringing anything. We're going to walk on stage in the sunlight with nothing and see what happens. And what kind of was surprising was nobody complained. Like, after all those years of all that dancing robots on stage and whatnot, we walk on stage with nothing and nobody even says anything. It was kind of, I mean, that was great, but it was kind of weird. So now it's sort of scaled back to a big rock show, but not so much so where the band gets lost in the HR Pufnstuf land.
Hard to find that balance, though? Is that where you're at right now? Really trying? You worried about the music getting upstaged a little bit, or was that the concern?
Well, a little bit. I mean, it just seemed like I mean, at the heart of it, what Ozzfest showed was like people coming for the music and the band, and everything else seems to be extras. And when the extras became front and center, it got a little weird. So, I mean, and I was thinking back to a time with both bands we were talking about, with Kiss and Alice Cooper, when I got to see them in really tiny places with nothing. Those are the shows I like the best, for some reason. So, sort of applying that
I mean,
thought process.
I love the theatrical aspect of music, growing up with the same stuff you did too. But one of the things that bothers me about those bands I love, whether it's Kiss or more recently Marilyn Manson for that matter, is the fact that people kind of tend to forget that the real core of why this is great is the songs.
Oh, yeah.
And 30 years down the line, you're not going to have the stage show. You're still going to have the record or the music, and that's what's got to hold up. So I think it's kind of cool that you did that. And
also I mean, I find for the band itself, like you have to just change it or you get bored. And you feel like you're just, you know, your 9,000th performance of Cats. You know, like, here we go again, you know, and you got to find a way to make it challenging again. So.
It's been a little while. This is your third album just as Rob Zombie, so it's been a little while since you kind of left the concept of a band and kind of carried the whole thing yourself on your shoulders. But going back on making that decision and doing that, was there any apprehension on your part, any worry of having that stress of having to really carry the full load yourself?
Well, not really, because, you know, White Zombie was never, you know, bands are never four people all putting in exactly the same. There's always one person who's sort of driving it. So that part didn't worry me. Just what was worrisome was, you know, the band broke up at its biggest moment. You know, the record we had out had just done 3 million, and we just come off our biggest tour ever, a huge tour, and we're like, but I figure that's the moment to stop it too. You know, you have to get out before someone asks you to get out, you know. So, but, you know, the worry was, you know, there had been some other people at that moment who had tried doing the same thing from big bands, and it hadn't worked, so people were like, oh, here comes the next, you know, solo project to go right in the toilet. So I think everybody was just waiting for it to fail, so it's kind of good.
So it's nice to prove them wrong, right?
Especially your friends, you know. Nothing makes them happier.
All right, well, cool. I mean, I know you got a lot of stuff going on. There's not going to be any announcements of any sort of Rob Zombie farewell tours or anything like that, right? You're going to just feel it out.
Nobody falls for that anymore, do they?
It's done now. You can't even take it seriously.
No, because you know, as they're announcing the farewell tour, they're also booking the reunion tour simultaneously.
Absolutely.
So.